The day my family disowned me, it was raining. I remember that part like it's branded into my bones. The way the storm tapped against the windows of the boardroom like it wanted, and like it could feel what was about to happen. Inside, my dad's face was the color of a fire truck. "Are you completely brain dead?" he barked, slamming a thick file onto the conference table so hard I jumped. "Do you even understand what you've done?" I was 23, fresh out of grad school, wearing the only tailored blazer I owned, and desperately trying not to cry in front of the entire Sinclair and Weston board. "Dad, it's not signed yet. I can fix it?" My older sister snorted. "You almost sold the Atlantic subsidiary for half its value. There's no fixing that level of idiocy, Liv." Yeah, that was the moment I knew. I wasn't part of the family business anymore. I was the family liability. The screw-up? A draft contract I had prepped for the sale of Weston Atlantic, one of our minor logistics arms. I'd used old valuation data before we bought out 3 competitor fleets. The document was caught before it did any real damage. But that didn't matter. To my family, perception was everything. And I'd apparently just thrown blood on the family crest. Dad paced the room like a caged animal. "You had one job. One. After everything we gave you. After all the opportunities. This is how you repay us?" I wanted to defend myself. To tell them I'd been juggling 2 acquisitions at once. That I hadn't slept more than 4 hours a night in weeks. That the deal should never have landed on my desk alone. But in the Sinclair family, excuses don't exist. There's success, and there's failure. Guess which side I was on now? "Elliot," my mom's voice floated in from the doorway, sharp and controlled. The board's waiting. She looked flawless, as usual. Her lipstick never smudged, even when she was telling me I was a disappointment. My dad adjusted his tie and glared at me one last time. "We'll finish this later." We didn't. That night, I was summoned to my dad's home office. A room that smelled like leather, old power, and generational arrogance. It's where my grandfather had signed our first $1 million deal, where every major family decision was made. "Effective immediately," Dad said, not even pretending to warm up. "You're out." I blinked. "Out? The board has no confidence in your judgment. You're terminated. 6 months severance. After that, you're on your own." "You're firing me?" My throat burned. "I'm your daughter." He finally looked at me, which is exactly why this hurts. "Liv, honey." My mom appeared behind me like a wraith in heels. "Your Uncle Theo's firm in Portland has agreed to take you on. It's a good fit far from the media circus." Portland. Like I was some PR mess they needed to exile. "And if I say no," my dad's jaw tightened, "then you're completely cut off. No severance, no family support, no name. Some choice." Only one person in that house had the decency to stand up for me, Grandpa Dean. The man who'd turned a small freight operation into an international empire. He stormed into the office just as I was walking out, face like a thundercloud. "Have you all lost your damn minds?" "Dad, it's done," my father said, standing his ground. Dean pointed a shaking finger. "You're gutting the best damn instinct this family's had in a decade. Over what? A typo?" He turned to me, eyes softening. "You're coming with me. We'll fix this." But I couldn't. Not then. My pride was bleeding out on the carpet. "They've made their choice," I told him, voice flat. I walked out that night and didn't look back. Ignored the plane ticket to Portland. Booked a cheap room at a boutique hotel in Midtown, using my personal card soon to be my only card once they froze my corporate accounts. I sat on that ugly floral bedspread, laptop open, and stared at the contract that supposedly cost me my future. Something felt off. Not in the numbers I knew I used, outdated figures, but the formatting, the phrasing. It wasn't my voice. I have a specific style, Oxford commas, clean margins, Helvetica Neue. This draft looked like someone who preferred Calibri and chaos. I pulled up my backup file, and there it was. Someone had altered it. Replaced my original with one that looked similar, but not enough to escape scrutiny. Just enough to get me blamed. My sister's smirk flashed in my mind, her condescending laugh. The way she'd leapt at the chance to rip me apart. It wasn't just a mistake. It was a setup. That's when I got the text from Grandpa Dean. "Nothing is what it seems, Liv. Watch. Wait. Learn." I didn't know what he meant, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to Portland. I wasn't going to run. I was going to watch. I was going to learn. And one day, I was going to make them regret ever thinking I was just another pawn in their power games. Because what they didn't know, what no one realized, is that the real contract, the one I'd originally drafted, it had a hidden clause, a tiny subsection buried in legal jargon, one that would quietly, irrevocably change everything when the time was right. 10 years is a long time to wait. But revenge, like fine wine and family grudges, gets better with age. The next morning, I woke up to an email from Sinclair and Weston's HR department. Subject, termination package. Finalized, the attachment laid it all out: severance terms, non-disclosure clauses, legal threats dressed up in polite corporate language. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just sat there, rereading the contract until the words blurred, thinking about how fast my entire life had changed. I went from being the heir to one of the oldest shipping empires on the East Coast to a walking PR problem with a suitcase and a severance countdown. But I wasn't broken. Not yet. After that sleepless night, something in me cracked open, and what came out wasn't fear. It was strategy. See, my grandfather's text wasn't just comforting. It was a breadcrumb. And when Dean Sinclair left breadcrumbs, you followed. I spent the next few days combing through my files, my emails, even old text chains. At first it felt pointless, but then deep in an archived folder I found something. An old email thread, sent from my sister's assistant's account to legal. It referenced a revised valuation update for board consideration. Dated 2 days after I submitted my final draft. It was her. Quinn had taken my contract, altered it, and slipped it to legal like it was mine. Quiet, clean, no fingerprints. I should have been crushed, knowing my own sister sold me out to climb higher. But honestly, it just made the goal sharper. They wanted me out? Fine. Let's see how well they swim without me when the tide turns. Over the next few months, I moved to Boston. It was far enough to keep a low profile, but close enough to keep my eye on Sinclair and Weston. I didn't post on LinkedIn. I ghosted every mutual connection. I built a new identity, one with no strings and no legacy hanging off my shoulders. I registered a new company under an LLC that didn't bear my last name, North Shore Atlas. Logistics consulting. Just a small fish in a massive ocean, but I knew where to swim. My first clients were tiny, family-owned ports along the coast. The kind of businesses Sinclair and Weston ignored because the numbers didn't impress a boardroom. But I knew better. I knew relationships mattered more than size. I knew people mattered, and I knew how to play the long game. Every day I worked like I was building an empire because I was. Quietly, one contract at a time. Meanwhile, the cracks started showing back home. First, a story in Maritime Business Weekly about Sinclair and Weston's expansion plan stalling in Southeast Asia. Then, a sharp dip in quarterly revenue. Rumors of internal restructuring floated around. Quinn was now the de facto heir, and from what I could gather, she was burning through resources like gasoline on dry leaves. The best part? They didn't see me coming. Not once. Not even when I began bidding on Port Authority consulting contracts in cities where Sinclair had a chokehold for decades. I stayed under the radar. Used shells, third-party reps, people loyal to me, not my name. All the while, Grandpa Dean kept sending me messages. Nothing obvious, just small texts that looked like motivational quotes to anyone else. Always read between the lines, live. That's where the real story hides. It's not the big moves that win the game. It's the quiet ones. When they underestimate you, don't correct them. Let them be surprised. He knew what was coming, and he knew I wasn't just going to get justice. I was going to take back everything they stole from me, piece by piece. About a year in, I got the news. Sinclair and Weston was moving to restructure its Atlantic fleet. The very division tied to the contract I drafted, the one that had secretly protected my rights to all outbound cargo routes east of the Panama Canal. Clause 14B. The hidden clause I buried in the contract like a landmine. It didn't activate until certain restructuring conditions were met. And now, they were checking every single box. Quinn and Dad thought they were fixing the company. What they were actually doing was handing me control of the only profitable part of their shipping network. And they had no idea. So I waited, watched, planted more roots. By year 3, North Shore Atlas had tripled in size. We had offices in Charleston, Miami, and Singapore. Quiet, unassuming, but razor sharp. Our clients raved about us. Industry folks whispered that we did what the big guys couldn't. We didn't just offer solutions. We made their problems disappear. And then, On a rainy Tuesday morning, I got a call. It was from my grandfather's lawyer. "Dean's not doing well," she said quietly. "He wants to see you." I flew to New York that night, walked into his penthouse, and found him in the study, frail but still sharp-eyed. "You built something real," he said. "Didn't need our name to do it." I nodded, emotion catching in my throat. He handed me a folder. "I'm changing my will." That moment was the start of everything unraveling. But at the time, it felt like the closing of a chapter. "I'm giving you full control of my shares," he continued. "The board doesn't know. Neither does your father. Quinn, well, she'll learn the hard way." I flipped through the documents. Everything was in place, legal, ironclad, bulletproof. "But you have to promise me one thing, Liv." "What's that?" "Don't just burn it all down. Build something better." I nodded. I didn't want ashes. I wanted legacy. A month later, he passed away. The obituaries painted him as a visionary, a business titan. My family played their roles at the funeral, shaking hands, whispering condolences, pretending to mourn. Quinn gave a speech about honor and tradition that almost made me gag. They didn't even know the will had changed yet, but they would, soon. I didn't attend the reception. Instead, I went straight to my lawyer's office. The new will would be revealed in exactly 30 days, per Grandpa's final instructions. No early peaks, no advance warnings, just a ticking clock counting down to the day the real game would begin. And I was ready. For the first time in years, I felt it in my bones. This wasn't the end of the story. It was the prologue. They say time heals all wounds, but that's only true for people who can forget. I didn't forget. I documented, studied, waited. And now, 10 years since the day they exiled me in the rain, I was staring down the final 30 days before everything changed. Grandpa Dean's will was a loaded gun, and my family, they were sleepwalking toward the barrel. The funny part? They still had no idea. Back in Boston, I buried myself in work. North Shore Atlas had become something bigger than I ever intended. Our client list read like the who's who of global freight. We weren't just playing the game, we were rewriting it. Meanwhile, Sinclair and Weston was wobbly. It started with Whispers vendors grumbling about late payments, minor ports mentioning cutbacks, junior execs quietly job hunting on LinkedIn. I kept my ear to the ground and my name far from anything they could trace. But I saw everything, especially Quinn. My sister had stepped into the CEO seat like she was born for it. She gave sleek keynote speeches, smiled on the cover of trade magazines, threw extravagant galas for partnerships she couldn't afford. All flash, no core. And slowly, beneath the glamour, the foundation began to crack. The month before the will reading, Sinclair and Weston announced the restructuring of their Atlantic operations. To the outside world, it sounded like a strategic pivot, refocusing on high-margin international routes. To me, it was the trigger, the legal match to the clause I planted a decade ago, Clause 14B. The moment they filed the restructuring paperwork, I legally had first right of refusal to claim specific shipping routes, dock permits, and transport infrastructure, and they didn't even know it. I spent 3 straight nights in my office, combing through current contracts, preparing documentation, lining up backdoor meetings. Every move had to be perfect. No leaks, no early warnings, because once the will was read, it would be war. The week of the reading, I rented a place in Manhattan. Not a hotel, a proper apartment. Something about it felt more grounded, more permanent. Like I wasn't just visiting, I was coming back. The day before the meeting, I received an envelope from Grandpa's lawyer. No note, no sender. Inside was a photo, black and white, grainy, Quinn, in my old office, holding a red pen. Behind her, on the screen, my original contract. My stomach turned. I hadn't seen this photo before, but the timestamp told me everything. They had proof. And Grandpa, he'd been holding it the whole time, waiting. I slipped the photo back into the envelope and put it in my bag. Alongside it were printed copies of legal filings, investor memos, clause documentation, every piece of ammo I'd need. This wasn't going to be a dramatic ambush. It was going to be a surgical strike. The morning of the will reading felt too quiet. I got dressed slowly, charcoal gray suit, black heels, hair up. No jewelry except for the tiny gold compass Grandpa gave me when I was 12. When you forget where you're going, remember who you are. I arrived early. Of course. The firm handling the Reading Hartman, Lowell, and May had been around longer than Sinclair and Weston, the kind of old money legal fortress that handled billion-dollar secrets like cocktail napkins. The conference room was everything you'd expect: dark wood, leather chairs, oil paintings of men who'd probably never changed a diaper in their lives. One by one, they arrived. Dad, looking tired but still trying to radiate control. Quinn, in designer everything, exuding smug confidence. That same smirk, the one that used to make my blood boil. Mom, her expression as blank as ever, pretending everything was fine, because pretending was easier than accountability. A few board members, Grandpa's personal attorney, Mr. Reardon, and then me. They didn't recognize me at first, not really. It had been years. I looked, calm. That unsettled them. Quinn's eyes narrowed. Liv? I smiled. Hey sis, miss me? The room fell quiet when Mr. Reardon cleared his throat. We're here to execute the final will and testament of Dean Sinclair. He pulled out a thick folder and adjusted his glasses. I'll remind everyone that Mr. Sinclair made substantial amendments to this document 2 months before his passing. All previous wills have been invalidated. Dad shifted in his seat. Quinn looked like she swallowed a lemon. The first part of the reading was standard donations to charities, gifts to loyal staff, small inheritances to extended family, and then to my granddaughter, Olivia Sinclair. I leave the remainder of my personal holdings in Sinclair and Weston, inclusive of all voting rights, board influence, and equity shares currently in my control. You could have heard a pin drop. Dad leaned forward, face pale. There must be a mistake. There's no mistake, I said, gently placing a folder on the table. Everything he left me is legally sound, and I intend to exercise it fully. On what grounds? Quinn hissed. You are fired. Fired under false pretenses, I replied calmly. Pretenses you helped manufacture. And then I slid the photo across the table. Quinn's face drained of color. I have the original contract. I have email records. And now, I have proof you altered my work to frame me. I opened my own folder. And since you triggered restructuring of the Atlantic Fleet, Clause 14B of that very contract now gives me controlling rights over those assets. You're bluffing, Dad snapped. No, I'm not. In fact, I handed him a printed copy of the clause, the ink's still warm on the legal filing. North Shore Atlas has officially exercised first right of refusal. Sinclair and Weston no longer owns the majority of its own shipping routes. Silence. It wasn't shock. It was devastation in slow motion. Like watching a building realize it's collapsing mid-fall. Reardon folded his hands. There's more, Quinn groaned. Oh, come on. Reardon ignored her. Dean Sinclair's final instructions include the immediate appointment of Olivia Sinclair as chairwoman of the Executive Advisory Board, effective today. Additionally, all trust, managed shares will now vote under her direction, permanently. Dad slumped back, defeated. Mom finally dropped the act, her eyes glassy. Quinn stood, livid. You think you're taking over? After all these years? After everything, I stood too. Not think, Quinn. I know. I picked up my bag, tucked the contract and the photo away. I spent 10 years building something from nothing while you were lighting Dad's legacy on fire with overpriced PR stunts and empty expansion plans. This isn't revenge. This is restoration. No one said a word, so I walked out. Not storming, not dramatic, just calm, controlled, exactly like Grandpa taught me. Outside, the sky was gray, heavy with rain, just like the day they kicked me out. Only this time, I wasn't leaving. I was coming home. You'd think walking out of that boardroom with the company in my pocket would feel like winning the lottery. It didn't. It felt heavy. Not bad, not regretful. Just weighty, like standing on the edge of a mountain you climbed alone, knowing you still had to build something at the top. I didn't go back to my apartment that night. I drove. No destination, just streets. My city again. Everything looked familiar but older, like New York had aged while I was gone and never told me. Eventually, I parked outside an old diner in Tribeca. I used to come here with Grandpa after school. They still had the same neon open sign buzzing in the window like a heartbeat. I sat in a booth, ordered black coffee, and opened my laptop. The world was already catching up. The media was foaming at the mouth. Breaking. Disgraced Sinclair daughter reclaims empire, family power. Play ends. With stunning upset. Exiled. Air Shock's boardroom. With legal coup, every headline made it sound like a soap opera. No one wanted to print the truth, that I'd been wrongfully burned and patiently, methodically taken back what was mine. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt still, like something inside me had finally stopped spinning. The next day, I walked into Sinclair and Weston's headquarters for the first time in a decade. Same marble floors, same glass elevators, same receptionist who glanced up, blinked, and dropped her coffee. Miss Sinclair? Technically, it's chairwoman now, I said, smiling. I stepped into the elevator, rode it to the top floor, and walked straight into the executive wing. The energy was off. People were stiff, pausing in doorways, whispering in corners. I guess word traveled fast. Quinn's office door was open. Her nameplate was still on the wall. Inside, she was packing. Her motions were jerky, tight. "You're early," she muttered, not looking at me. "You're still here," I said. She turned. "Don't act like you're better than me." I raised an eyebrow. "I didn't alter your documents and throw you to the wolves. You think you earned this? You left. You failed. You're only here because of Grandpa." I leaned against the doorway, calm. "And you're only here because Dad couldn't see past his ego. Don't confuse luck with legacy." She didn't answer, just kept packing. I didn't stop her. I had bigger problems than Quinn's bruised pride. My first move wasn't revenge. It was repair. The company was bleeding from the inside. Operational inefficiencies, bloated middle management, unpaid vendors, low morale, delayed shipments. It was a miracle Sinclair and Weston hadn't collapsed already. I didn't call a board meeting. I called a team meeting. I gathered department heads, real ones, not the marble-mouthed boardroom dinosaurs who only showed up for stock dividends. I introduced myself simply. "I'm Olivia Sinclair, and I'm not here to play CEO dress-up. I'm here to fix what got broken while no one was looking." You could feel the tension in the air, wary, cautious. So I gave them facts, data, financials. Leaked them my own internal reports from North Shore Atlas showing where the shipping division had hemorrhaged money due to Quinn's bad calls. I didn't name names, I didn't throw punches. I offered plans, clear ones, timelines, benchmarks, results. By the end of the meeting, people looked less like they were waiting for a bomb to drop and more like they were remembering how to breathe. Rebuilding wasn't glamorous. I started by gutting vanity projects. The multi-million-dollar international gala Quinn had planned, canceled. I terminated a PR firm that had been bleeding us dry for branding strategy and reallocated that money into improving shipping logistics tech. I met with regional managers personally, people who hadn't been invited to HQ in years. I visited a dock in Newark at 6 a.m., had coffee with the guys hauling freight, asked what equipment they actually needed instead of what looked good on spreadsheets. It wasn't hard. You just had to give a damn. Of course, not everyone was thrilled. Dad went radio silent, no emails, no calls. I think he was still waiting for someone to tell him this was temporary, that it would all blow over. It wouldn't. And then there was Quinn. A week after her exit, she went on the offensive, gave an exclusive interview to a financial news outlet, painted herself as the victim of a boardroom ambush orchestrated by a bitter outcast with a grudge. I didn't respond publicly. Didn't need to. The next day, our legal team filed formal documentation showing clause enforcement, board compliance, and evidence of the original contract alterations. Quinn's narrative collapsed. She tried to sue. She lost. Behind the scenes, I started a project Grandpa and I used to daydream about, the Sinclair Reformation Plan. I renamed it Project Anchor. The idea was simple: take the bloated, outdated empire and reshape it into a modern, tech-savvy shipping and logistics network built on transparency, community partnerships, and actual efficiency. We'd still be competitive globally, but with less waste, less ego, and fewer ties to vanity. I brought in outside consultants, some from North Shore Atlas, under strict NDAs. I promoted from within, gave raises to the people who did the real work, and most importantly, I told the truth. Every investor call, every internal update, no fluff, just progress and problems laid out side by side. People didn't run. They leaned in. It turns out honesty in a company like ours, that was the real disruption. 3 weeks in, the stock price stopped falling. 4 weeks in, it started to climb. By the end of the quarter, Sinclair and Weston posted its first surplus in 2 years. Small, but real. And that's when the calls started coming in from names that hadn't spoken to me since I got fired. "Oh, Liv, we always believed in you. Glad to see the company in good hands again. My door's always open if you need guidance. Funny how fast people rediscover your worth when your numbers go green." I took notes. I smiled. I said thank you. Then I filed their names under non-essential. One night, about 6 weeks in, I stayed late at the office. Everyone was gone. The lights dimmed. The building was quiet in a way that felt sacred, almost like it was holding its breath. I stepped into the old executive study, the room where Dad fired me. Everything was exactly the same. Same leather chairs. Same cigar smell buried in the carpet. Same fake oil painting of a ship we never owned. I stood in the center of the room and exhaled. Not in victory. In relief. I didn't just come back to win. I came back to fix it. To finish what Grandpa started. And maybe, just maybe, to finally find peace in the place that once broke me. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Looking good, kid. Just don't let the sharks circle too long." Attached was a photo. Me from that first team meeting mid-sentence, focused, fire in my eyes. No name, no signature. But I knew who it was. Grandpa always said, "Revenge is sweet, but building something better, that's legacy." It's funny how fast people change once they think you're winning. The same names that once ghosted me were now dropping into my inbox with subject lines like "Let's reconnect" or "Just so proud of you." Even my mom sent a card, handwritten, elegant. "Your grandfather would be proud. I hope we can talk soon." No apology, no ownership, just a carefully curated olive branch that made it easier for her to say, "She tried." I didn't respond. Not because I was angry anymore. I wasn't. I was. Past it. And once you stop needing anything from someone, their power vanishes like mist. The company was finally stabilizing. Project Anchor was working. Teams were collaborating. Money was no longer hemorrhaging from every direction. Our Singapore division had hit a record quarter. The docks in Newark and Savannah had new tech in place, cutting wait times in half. We were leaner, sharper, focused. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours again, mine. I started accepting speaking invitations, not for vanity. Strategy. Public visibility meant press control, narrative control. It also made Sinclair and Weston relevant again, no longer just a legacy name clinging to past glory, but a modernized, female-led logistics empire. The industry started to take us seriously again, and that's when the sharks started circling. It started small. Anonymous emails forwarded to our board questioning my financial dealings. Whispers that North Shore Atlas, my former company, had funneled inside information to Sinclair and Weston. Of course, none of it was true, but it was enough to plant doubt. Then came a leaked memo suggesting I had quietly offered buyout deals to smaller freight competitors in exchange for personal stakes again. False. I wasn't stupid. This wasn't some bored Reddit troll trying to stir drama. This was targeted. Someone wanted me gone. At first, I thought maybe it was Quinn. She had every reason to sabotage me, but the style was different. Quinn was loud, dramatic. She loved the fire. This was cold, precise, strategic. I started digging. Late nights, encrypted calls to trusted contacts, chasing financial fingerprints. It took weeks, but eventually, I found a pattern: minor stock dumps from offshore entities right before any bad press hit. The kind of calculated timing that only happens when someone knows exactly how long a line needs to breathe. The name attached to those accounts? Evan Reeds. I stared at the screen for a long time, not because I was shocked, but because it hurt. Evan had been my operations director at North Shore Atlas. One of the first hires. Quiet, reliable, brilliant with port efficiency models. I trusted him, trained him. He helped build the systems I later brought into Sinclair, and he sold me out. I confronted him in his office. He didn't even try to deny it. "Nothing personal," he said, arms folded. "Just business." Those 2 words, "just business," felt like a slap. The same phrase my dad used when he cut me loose a decade ago. "You worked beside me for years," I said. "I trusted you." He shrugged. "And now, you're the queen. You don't really think they'll let you stay on top forever, do you?" "They?" He smiled smug. And suddenly, I saw the whole picture. It wasn't just Evan. It was a small circle of quiet board members and silent investors who didn't like the way the company had changed, didn't like that they weren't in control anymore, didn't like that a young woman, an exiled one, at that had rebuilt what they'd all failed to save. They planted Evan, maybe not from the beginning, but recently enough, used his access to smear me slowly, drip by drip, until I looked tainted enough to oust. It almost worked, but I wasn't 23 anymore, and I didn't break easy. I didn't fire him. Not right away. I needed more. So I gave him rope. I fed him limited data, redirected his access, let him think I was distracted, vulnerable. Meanwhile, my internal security team, handpicked and fiercely loyal, monitored every move he made. It didn't take long. He was caught red-handed transmitting internal reports to an outside party, one of our minority shareholders, who had ties to a private equity firm quietly trying to take us over from the inside. We packaged everything: emails, financial trails, access logs, and presented it at the emergency board meeting I called the following Monday. I still remember Evan's face when he walked in and saw the projection screen waiting with his name on it. His jaw dropped. "Miss Sinclair," one board member said, half panicked. "How long have you known?" "Long enough," I replied. I walked them through it all, piece by piece, quiet, precise, just like their betrayal. When it was done, I looked around the room. "This is your reminder," I said calmly, "that I didn't come back here to babysit legacy titles and fragile egos. I came back to save this company, and I did. You may not like the methods. You may not like me, but you will respect what we've built, or you're free to leave." Evan was escorted out 15 minutes later. Half the board didn't make eye contact with me after that. Didn't matter. They didn't have to like me. They just had to understand I wasn't going anywhere. That night, I sat alone in the executive lounge. Rain tapped against the windows again, just like it had 10 years ago. Except this time I wasn't crying. I was thinking. Not about revenge. Not anymore. I was thinking about legacy. About what it meant to lead with clarity, with grit, with the kind of strength that doesn't come from titles or family names, but from being tested in the fire and walking out with your purpose intact. People still doubted me. That was fine. Let them. Because while they were busy underestimating me, I was building something they couldn't see coming. Not a company, a future. The next morning, I released a public statement. No drama, no personal attacks. Just facts. We had caught a breach. We had resolved it. Sinclair and Weston remained under strong leadership with a clear vision forward. Transparency would remain our policy. Accountability our standard. The press respected it. Our investors appreciated it. Even the industry quietly backed off. The wolves had circled, but they'd bitten steel. Weeks passed. Then a month. The silence returned. Not the silence of fear or scandal, but the good kind. The kind where work gets done. Where systems start humming. Where people don't flinch when you walk into a room. The kind where trust starts to grow again, slow but sure. And somewhere in that silence, I realized something. This wasn't just about fixing a company. It never had been. It was about finally stepping into the space they tried to keep from me. Not for revenge, but for myself. For every kid told they weren't ready. For every woman told to sit down and be quiet. For every underdog who builds in the shadows until it's time to shine. And for the girl I used to be, the one who stood in the rain and thought her story was over. She'd be proud. She'd be terrified, but proud. And she'd be right, because the story wasn't over. Not yet. It was raining again the day I visited the old house. Not pouring, just a steady, quiet drizzle. The kind that taps against windows and makes memories louder than they should be. I didn't come for them. I came for me. 10 years ago, I walked out of this house feeling like I had no name, no future, no place in the world. Now I stood at the same front gate with everything they said I'd never earn. The difference was, this time, I wasn't begging to be let in. I was just ready to close the loop. I'd gotten the call a few days earlier. From my father. He didn't say much. "Liv, can we talk?" His voice was older, heavier, a little worn around the edges. I agreed to come by, not out of obligation, but curiosity. Maybe, on some strange level, I wanted to see what regret looked like in a house that once treated pride like oxygen. The door opened before I even knocked. My mom stood there. Same pristine makeup, same posture, but something in her eyes had softened. "Hi," she said. "Hey." We stood there for a beat, unsure who we were to each other now. Then she stepped aside, and I walked back into the home that once pushed me out. It felt smaller somehow, Not physically, just less important, less powerful. Like the place had been holding its breath for a decade and finally let it out the second I stepped in. Dad was in his study. Of course. He looked up when I entered, eyes scanning my face like he was trying to find the version of me he remembered. "You look like her," he said. I knew who he meant. My grandmother. The only other person who ever challenged him and got away with it. "I get that a lot," I replied, sitting across from him. "So, you wanted to talk." He nodded slowly, steepling his fingers. "I made a mistake. I didn't flinch. I didn't rush to fill the silence. I just let it hang. It was easier," he continued, "to believe you'd failed than admit I had. I thought I was protecting the company. But, truthfully, I was protecting myself. From the shame. From the fear that maybe I hadn't raised the leader this family needed. I wasn't the leader you wanted," I said quietly. "But I became the one the company needed." He nodded, eyes misting. "I see that now. That should have felt like victory, but it didn't. Because it wasn't about winning anymore. It was about healing something deeper, something that had nothing to do with titles or contracts. You don't have to forgive me," he added. But I had to say it. For what it's worth. I stood, smoothed my coat. "I don't know if forgiveness is the right word," I said honestly. "But I'm not carrying it anymore. That weight, it's yours now." He nodded, eyes falling to the desk. I turned to go, then paused. "She would have been proud too, you know," he said, barely audible. This time, I didn't reply. Some things are better left as echoes. I stepped back out into the rain and didn't look back. That chapter was closed. Not with vengeance. Not with applause. Just clarity. The best kind of ending. In the months that followed, Sinclair and Weston didn't just survive, we thrived. We closed new partnerships across Asia, streamlined our EcoPort initiatives in the Pacific, and restructured our equity model to give long-term employees ownership stakes. The press started calling it the Sinclair Renaissance. I called it finally doing it right. One of our regional managers from Houston sent me a message that stuck with me. This isn't the same company anymore. It actually feels human. That one line meant more than any stock surge or award ceremony ever could. I got offers, of course. Buyouts, mergers, interviews, deals. Even a documentary pitch from one of those streaming giants. The Girl Who Took the Throne was their working title. I passed. This wasn't a show. This was my life. And for once, it finally belonged to me. I kept my apartment in Boston. Even after I moved back to New York full-time, there was something about that little space that grounded me. That reminded me of who I was when everything was stripped away, when I was scared, unsure, but still building. Sometimes I'd fly up for a weekend and just sit by the window with tea, watching the city move outside. Nobody there knew who I was, and that anonymity felt like home. On the 1-year anniversary of Grandpa's death, I visited his grave. No cameras, no entourage. Just me, a thermos of black coffee, and the compass he gave me. I knelt beside the headstone, traced his name with my fingertips, and smiled. "You were right," I whispered. "The Queen's the strongest piece." I poured out a bit of coffee beside the flowers. Black, no sugar, just how he liked it. As I stood to leave, I noticed something someone had etched onto the back of his stone. "You taught her to play. She taught them to lose." I didn't know who did it, but they got it exactly right. One night, late into fall, I walked through our new logistics control center in Brooklyn. The building used to be an abandoned rail depot. Now it was a living brain for the company, lit up with maps, dashboards, real-time shipping feeds. A young intern was giving a tour to a group of new hires. As I passed, he paused, then nodded at me. "That's her," he whispered, "the one who changed everything." I smiled, offered a nod, and kept walking. Because that's the thing about change. You don't have to shout it from the rooftops. You just have to be it. And eventually, everyone else catches up. People ask me sometimes if I ever got revenge. If what I did was calculated, if every step was designed to punish the people who cut me loose. And maybe, in the beginning it was, maybe I wanted them to hurt, to see me and feel regret in their bones. But somewhere along the way, revenge turned into something else, into purpose, into power, into peace. The real win wasn't taking the company back. It was becoming someone who didn't need their approval anymore. And that's something no boardroom, no headline, no inheritance can ever give you. It's still raining as I write this. But this time, I'm not standing outside, waiting for a door to open. I'm inside, dry, warm, whole. And when I hear the rain tapping against the windows, I don't think of failure. I think of growth, of how water softens even the hardest stone, given enough time. Of how the girl they cast out came back not to destroy, but to rebuild. Stronger, wiser, and completely, entirely free. Story 2, not at all. Sarah, whatever personal emergency you believe you are experiencing, I don't care. Next week is the Peterson account presentation, and I need everyone to be attentive and on time. Victoria Marshall's voice pierced the atmosphere like a blade, the sound of her well-groomed nails thumping the mahogany desk. I held the medical leave request form in my shaking hands and refused to back down as she looked down at me. Please, Miss Marshall. If it wasn't essential, I wouldn't inquire. The patient, the sufferer, her scarlet lips curled into a scowl as she interrupted. Sarah, you're not a nurse, you're an account executive. We don't care what medical drama you're involved in. This is not a charity, it's a marketing company. I inhaled deeply while attempting to maintain a steady voice. I recognize that. However, this is not the same. He has no one else, and his health is gradually becoming worse. 1 week will be sufficient for me. I jumped as Victoria slapped her fist on the desk. I've had enough of your justifications. For weeks you've been preoccupied with taking lunches and departing early. Right before our most important presentation of the year, you want to take an entire week off. No, is the response. My chest constricted. This was distinct from Victoria's usual harshness. This was unkind. Marshall, miss. It's been 3 years since I took a sick day. Every week and every holiday, I have worked. You have also inquired. This is all I'm requesting. I may cost us millions in a week. At 5'10", she stepped up to her full height while wearing high-end heels. She was much taller than me. Are you aware of the significance of the Peterson account for this company? You don't, of course. You're too preoccupied with your small humanitarian endeavor to notice the wider picture. Humanitarian project seemed like a filthy term the way she pronounced it. The man in the hospital bed across town was on my mind. Despite his anguish, he had a soft smile and compassionate eyes. Because Victoria Marshall was only able to view her quarterly estimates, he didn't deserve to die alone. I'm taking a week off. Silently but forcefully, I said. I'll work from home. Weekends, nights, whatever it takes. But I have to support him. Victoria narrowed her eyes ominously. Sarah, are you going to locate me? I'm acting morally. Her loud, icy chuckle reverberated across her corner office. What's correct? I'll tell you what's correct. Doing your work is the correct thing to do. Being a team player is the correct thing to do. Knowing that we don't have the luxury of playing Mother Teresa in this line of work is the appropriate thing to do. Even though my heart was racing, I remained resolute. I'm taking a week, but I understand if you have to write me up or deduct money from my paycheck. Like a predator circling its prey, Victoria moved carefully around her desk. Better than that, I promise. She grabbed my leave request form and ripped it in half, then into quarters, scattering the fragments on the ground. You've been let go. Even though the words felt like a physical blow, I didn't let her see me wince. I asked for medical leave, and now you're firing me? Because of your insubordination, I'm firing you. Inadequate performance and disregard for business interests. She grinned, but her eyes never met the expression. Take pleasure in being unemployed. Sarah, your sacrifice will undoubtedly be appreciated by your patient. I should have been heartbroken. In an instant, 3 years of my life, innumerable 60-hour work weeks, missed family gatherings, and postponed vacations were all gone. However, I experienced a completely different kind of relief as I stood in Victoria's office and observed her smug satisfaction. I appreciate you making this choice simpler. As I turned to go, I said. And Sarah too, I was called after by Victoria. Asking for a reference is pointless. It never worked here as far as I can tell. I ignored my soon-to-be former coworker's curious looks as I left her office with a confident demeanor. I packed up my desk with steady hands, carefully putting my personal belongings and pictures in a cardboard box. Jenny, from accounting, hurried over, her face full of concern. Sarah, what took place? I heard voices raised. Victoria fired me. I said simply, wrapping my favorite coffee mug in newspaper. What? She can't do that. Not over medical leave. I smiled at Jenny's outrage. She can. And she did. But it's okay. Really. And surprised it was as I walked out of the glass and steel building that had been my professional home for the past 3 years. I felt lighter than I had in months. My career might be in shambles, but I knew I was doing the right thing. The hospital was a 20-minute drive from the office as I navigated through midday traffic. I thought about how I'd ended up here. It had started. Thomas Edwards didn't look like a man worth millions in his faded hospital gown, with his silver hair thinning and his face gone from chemotherapy. He looked like any other patient, but it was his eyes that caught my attention. Bright, alert, and filled with a kindness that seemed to defy his circumstances. "The Great Gatsby again," he'd said when I walked in with the book. "Don't you think that's a bit on the nose for a cancer ward?" I laughed, surprised by his humor. "Would you prefer something more upbeat?" I have the bell jar in my back that had made him laugh to a worn, genuine sound that seemed to brighten the sterile hospital room. We'd spent the next hour talking about literature, life, and everything in between. By the time I left, I knew I'd met someone special. Over the next few weeks, I found myself visiting Thomas more frequently. He told me about his life, how he built his investment firm from nothing, how he lost his wife to cancer 15 years ago, how his children were scattered across the globe, too busy with their own lives to visit their dying father. "It's my own fault," he said without bitterness. "I spent so many years building my empire. I forgot to build relationships. Now look at me. All the money in the world and not a soul to share it with." But that wasn't entirely true anymore because he had me. I pulled into the hospital parking lot, grabbing my box of belongings from the passenger seat as I walked through the familiar corridors toward Thomas's room. I thought about Victoria's words in joy. Unemployment. She had no idea that some things were worth more than a steady paycheck or a corner office. Thomas was awake when I walked in, his face lighting up despite the obvious pain he was in. "Sarah, what are you doing here so early? Don't we have work?" I set my box down and pulled up my usual chair beside his bed. "Change of plans. Looks like I'll be able to spend more time here after all." He studied my face carefully, his keen intelligence not dulled by illness or medication. "What took place?" "I got fired," I said simply. "My boss didn't appreciate me requesting medical leave to be here with you, Sarah." His voice was filled with concern. "You shouldn't have done that. Not for me. I'm not worth." "Don't," I interrupted gently. "Don't say you're not worth it. Every human being deserves to have someone by their side during times like this. Besides," I added with a smile, "that job was slowly killing my soul anyway." He chuckled weakly. "Well, when you put it that way," his expression turned serious. "But what we do now?" I shrugged, trying to appear more confident than I felt. "I'll figure something out. Right now, let's focus on getting your pain levels under control. The nurse mentioned you refused your morning medication." Thomas looked embarrassed. "It makes me too drowsy. I detest not being able to think clearly, and I hate seeing you in anguish." I countered, grabbing for the call button. "Let's compromise. Take the pills, and I'll read to you until you fall asleep." I brought a new book. He raised an eyebrow. "Please tell me it's not the Badger." We both laughed, and for a minute, the weight of everything. My final job, his sickness. The uncertainties of the future began to lift. The nurse came in with Thomas's medicine, and I settled in to read, bringing up an old edition of To Kill a Mockingbird. As I read, watching Thomas progressively relax as the pain medicine took effect, I thought about how sometimes the largest sacrifices take us exactly where we're supposed to be. Although Victoria Marshall believed she was punishing me, she had actually given me something invaluable, the freedom to go where I needed to be and do what I needed to do. I had no idea that this was only the start of a tale that would permanently alter our lives. The days that followed settled into a pattern, with novels, crossword puzzles, and an unending supply of awful jokes that nevertheless always made Thomas grin. They arrived at the hospital early in the morning. We spent hours discussing his corporate empire, the literature we enjoyed, my aspirations to launch my own marketing firm, and our lives juggling his drug regimen and working with his medical staff. In addition to Thomas Edwards, the patient, I also learned more about Thomas Edwards, the man. More about resiliency than any achievement could possibly convey is what I discovered about his first business endeavor, a failing computer repair operation in the 1980s. I discovered how his early investment decisions in new digital art platforms were impacted by his late wife, Margaret's love of art. Thomas asked me a question that surprised me one afternoon when the sun was shining through the hospital window, creating long shadows around the room. "Sarah, why did you actually quit your job for me?" I glanced up from the crossword puzzle we've been doing together in the newspaper. "You told me what you felt I should hear after I told you." Gently, he broke off. "I want the truth, though." I put the newspaper down and thought about his query. "Remember when you initially came here?" I read to the patients at that time. He gave a nod. "That day I read to 17 individuals, 15. Bring your family along. A buddy is coming to visit. Only you are by yourself." When I questioned the nurse about you, I looked him in the eyes. "You haven't had a single guest in 3 weeks," she remarked. My heart was broken. He said quietly, "Well, pity." "No," I answered firmly. "Not sympathy. Recognition. I've always recognized something in myself in you. The propensity to put your all into your profession and your objectives till you look back and see that you neglected to make connections along the route." Thomas was silent for a while. At last he responded, "You're too young to be so wise. Also, you are too significant to be alone yourself," I retorted. His eyes were suddenly filled with tears, yet he still grinned. "Significant. I am simply an old idiot named Manuel who created one of the biggest investing companies in the nation. I finished the person who saved many lives, produced thousands of employment, and revolutionized ethical investing procedures. Yes, I done my homework. Google." Amused, he asked. "LinkedIn. Actually, you should update your profile." After we both laughed, the difficult time was over. However, a deeper understanding and a realization of our commonalities had emerged between us. Despite the fact that our ages and situations are different, Thomas's conditions started to worsen more quickly as the week went on. Thomas himself remained calm and unwavering despite the physician's whispered discussions about calming him and controlling expectations. One evening, when the hospital resorted to its regular routine, he muttered, "Sarah, do anything for me, please." "Anything," I said, referring to my briefcase. "Last month, my secretary brought one. A letter is present. I want you to bring it to me." In his room, I discovered the briefcase hidden away. Little closet. Even if the leather is weathered, it is still stylish. A wrapped letter with the simple address, Victoria Marshall, CEO of Marshall & Associates Marketing, was inside. My heart stopped beating. "Thomas." "Yes," he said, closely observing my response. "Although she is unaware of it, your previous employer is Victoria Marshall. My firm's discreet investment in coaching has been a major factor in her company's recent success." My thoughts were racing as I gazed at the envelope in my hands. "You were aware of my workplace all along." He gave a nod. "I was able to identify your business ID card that initial day. For years, I have been keeping up with Marshall & Associates developments. One of my more intriguing investments is this one. Why didn't you speak up?" "Because I wanted to know you as Sarah, not as a worker for a business that I own in part." Wincing a little, he moved in his bed, and I'm happy I did. It revealed your true self to me. Someone who, even at great personal expense, would sacrifice all to assist a stranger. The envelope seemed very heavy in my hands as I sat down hard in my chair. "How's the letter look?" "Just the truth," he said, "on leadership, business strategy, and investment methods." He hesitated, his face hardening a little, and said that how we treat people is a better indicator of success than market share or quarterly earnings. I glanced at Thomas and then at the envelope. "When would you like it delivered?" "Tomorrow," he said. "Victoria Marshall has to wake up to the true consequences of achievement, in my opinion." That night, with the letter securely tucked in my back, I departed the hospital. I couldn't help but wonder what would happen tomorrow. Victoria Marshall, believing she had all the power, had attempted to shatter me. However, life has a way of leveling the playing field occasionally. Through justice and the honest truth, not through retaliation or hatred. Victoria had no idea how drastically her life would alter, and I was in the front row to see it happen. I was in front of the Marshall & Associates Leeming office building early the next morning. I gripped Thomas's letter tightly. The security guy, who had been saying good morning to me every day for the past 3 years, gave me an apologetic expression. "I apologize, Miss Collins, but you are no longer on his authorized guest list, Miss Marshall's directives." I took out my phone with a smile. "Would you kindly give Victoria's office a call? Inform her that Thomas Edwards sent me a letter." The name caused the guard's eyes to widen a little. He obviously knew it. He gave me a visitor's badge after we spoke for a little while, His face seemed perplexed. "You'll see Miss Marshall right away." It seemed unreal to ascend the elevator to the 20th floor. Only a week ago. Trying urgently to manage my charity work and job life, I've been hurrying up here, balancing coffee and presentation materials. I had never been more at ease than I was now, being aware that everything would change in the next moment. Victoria's assistant leaped to her feet as soon as I exited the elevator. She hurried to open the office door and said, "Miss Marshall is waiting for you." She was unable to look me in the eyes, I noticed. Clearly, word had gotten out that I was fired. Victoria sat rigidly behind her desk, her face deliberately neutral. "I assume this isn't a misguided attempt to get your job back," she said. Coolly, referring to Sarah, I put the letter from Thomas on her desk. "This is a delivery from Thomas Edwards, Victoria." Her immaculately manicured hand hovered over the envelope as she gazed at it. The investor was Thomas Edwards. Likewise. Uninvited, the first took a seat and relished the moment of irritation that appeared on her face. He requested that I personally deliver this. Victoria picked up the envelope, her eyes narrowing. "How is Thomas Edwards known to you?" "I'm patient with him," I said plainly. "I helped, and you fired me for it." Victoria's face lost color as the implications dawned on her. She opened the letter with shaky hands and quickly skimmed through its contents. Her face went from incredulous to horrified to almost panicked as I watched. "This," she muttered more to herself than to me. "This can't be right. What's the matter? Victoria? It's not the letter you anticipated." She gave me a look. She lost all of her normal poise. "He is withdrawing his capital, everything, with immediate effect." She frantically shuffled through the papers. "We would be destroyed by this. The new office expansion, the Peterson account, everything. His firm is behind it all. I am aware." "You know," I said in a low voice. She raised her voice abruptly. "You were aware of this, yet you remained silent. At what precise moment should I have brought it up?" Victoria suddenly stood up and began to pace behind her desk, "As you were dismissing me or threatening to ban me from the industry. This needs to be fixed. I need your assistance to fix this." "Speak with him. Describe how everything was a misunderstanding, a miscommunication." I cut in, my tone hardening. "I tried to help a dying man, and you fired me. You made fun of my empathy and viewed basic human decency as a weakness. Victoria, that wasn't a miscommunication. It was a decision." She turned to me and stopped pacing. "Please," he said. To my surprise, I could hear genuine desperation in her voice. "I'll return your job to you. A raise, a promotion, anything you desire. Please save this for me." As his own time dwindled, I pictured Thomas lying in his hospital bed, continuing to think about others. I thought about all the employees at Marshall & Associates who lived in fear of Victoria's moods and arbitrary decisions. I thought of Jenny from accounting, weeping in the bathroom after another public humiliation, and Mark from creative, who had missed his daughter's performance because Victoria wanted last-minute revisions to a presentation. "I don't want my job back," I said finally, "but I will tell you what Thomas advised me to say when you made this offer." She leaned forward eagerly. "Indeed, he says you have a choice. You can maintain his money, keep your position, keep everything, but only if you agree to some adjustments." "What changes?" I pulled out another envelope, this one containing the document Thomas had drafted late last night. Complete revamping of the company's management style, installation of correct work-life balance rules, equitable medical leave, frequent employee satisfaction surveys, with actual penalties for poor leadership. Oh, and I pause, enjoying the moment. I'll be supervising the reforms as the new director of employee relations. Victoria's mouth fell. "You're kidding. Thomas Edwards doesn't joke about business," I remarked. "You have till the end of the day to decide. Accept these conditions, or watch all you've built shatter." She sank into her chair, all pretension of superiority gone. "He's really dying, isn't he?" "Yes," I answered gently. "He is. And his last act in business will either be salvaging this organization from its toxic culture or making an example of it. You have an option." Victoria gazed at the papers for a while. When she finally raised her head to face me, I noticed for the first time that her eyes were filled with respect. "Didn't you plan this out?" Approaching him and sharing information about the business. I gave a head shake. "No, Victoria. I just helped someone in need by being kind to them. Everything else." I pointed to her desk's lettering. It was all Thomas. He has been keeping an eye on this business for years, hoping to see if he can develop into a trustworthy leader. You proved yourself to him last week. The ensuing quiet was thick with comprehension. Victoria took up a pen and signed the papers, her fingers trembling only a little. You'll want your own office, I suppose. I amended with a view. Corner office. Next week, I begin. As I walked out of Victoria's office, there was an uncanny silence on the floor. Soon enough, word would get out about what had occurred. For now, though, I enjoyed the quiet. I needed to make one more stop. I went back to the hospital and saw Thomas asleep. He breathed steadily but shallowly. I took his weak hand in mine as I sat in my normal chair. It's finished, I said quietly. Everything was autographed by her. A little smile appeared on his face as his eyes opened. I never questioned that she would. Victoria Marshall has intelligence. Perhaps ruthless, but not foolish. Thank you, I said, giving his hand a little squeeze for everything. He gave a little shake of his head. No, thank you, Sarah. You demonstrated to me that it is still possible to change things and leave them in a better state than when we found them. I spent the following 3 days alternating between the office and the hospital, establishing the new procedures that would revolutionize Marshall and Associates. To her credit, Victoria embraced the changes with the same ferocity with which she used to intimidate her staff. Perhaps she was simply safeguarding her investment, or perhaps her perspective on leadership had actually changed. Thomas persevered long enough to witness the initial findings of the employee satisfaction survey. As I read him the overwhelmingly good comments, I gave him a feeble smile. See, he muttered, the finest investments might occasionally be made in individuals. As I read to him from The Great Gatsby, he held my hand and died quietly 3 days later. His last quip about inappropriate book selections on a medical ward wasn't funny. I was somewhat aback by how many people showed up for his memorial ceremony, including not just coworkers and colleagues, but also others whose lives he had quietly impacted. He has mentored small company owners, given scholarships to deserving students, and provided anonymous assistance to nonprofit employees. Victoria was also present, standing silently in the rear, appearing reflective. I sat in my new corner office a month later, going over applications for our enlarged employee assistance program. Jenny from accounting smiled and stuck her head in. She said, "You'll never believe what just happened." All of the requests for flexible working were accepted by Victoria. She did it with a smile on her face. I looked at the picture of Thomas I had on my desk and laughed. I stated that occasionally people may surprise you, particularly when someone demonstrates a superior approach. I reflected on how life has a tendency of coming full circle as I gazed out over the metropolitan skyline. I was dismissed by Victoria because she believed that my sympathy was a sign of weakness. Rather, that same empathy had brought me to Thomas, who demonstrated to us all that our actions toward others are what really make us strong. Marshall and Associates' corporate culture was gradually changing. Victoria was learning how to strike a balance between empathy and ambition. Additionally, workers were at last feeling acknowledged and appreciated. It wasn't flawless. There is never any change. However, it was a step forward. I recalled Thomas's comments each morning as I entered the building. The finest investments might occasionally be made in individuals. When I was merely a volunteer reader, he had put money into me because he thought I had something valuable. I was now making investments in other people, establishing the sort of workplace where success was determined by the lives we impacted rather than just financial gain, and where being nice was not viewed as a sign of weakness. Although Victoria still occasionally reverted to her old ways, a mechanism was in place to control her worst tendencies. More significantly, she was starting to see the advantages of having a more contented and devoted staff. There was an increase in productivity. We had a lower turnover rate and a stellar industry reputation. Thomas's attorneys sent me a parcel exactly 1 year after his death. It contained a letter from his last days, written in his signature, unsteady handwriting. If you're reading this, Sarah, it's been a year since we first met. I hope you've noticed the results of our little company transformation project. I hope you've learned something about yourself, though, more than anything else. You know, I saw more than simply a good-hearted person when you entered my hospital room on that first day. A leader caught my eye. Someone who recognized that empathy, not authority, is the source of genuine power. Someone who has the power to alter the way a whole industry views human resources, not simply one corporation. I've left you something else because of this. Voting stock in my financial company. Make good use of them. Seek for other businesses such as Marshall and Associates. Potential rich businesses are hampered by toxic leadership. Modify them as well. I remember you telling me that you saw something in me and quit your job. I saw something in you too. Ethical corporate leadership's future. Make me feel proud. After reading that letter, Thomas, I sat in my office for a long time, filled with trust and appreciation. Dozens of emails from other businesses inquiring about our turnaround were in my inbox as I watched the city sunset. Are you curious about our secret? Reports on my desk revealed record profitability and previously unheard of levels of employee happiness. Victoria knocked on my door with 2 coffee cups in her hand, a weekly custom that has become a peace offering. She handed me a cup and said, "Good news. The contract for the Peterson account was recently extended. They claimed that our new company culture initiatives were to blame." I grinned as I recalled the day she fired me for the same account a year prior. "Isn't it funny how things turn out?" She gave a meaningful nod. "I never gave you enough credit for what you and Thomas accomplished, You had the opportunity to ruin this business, but you chose to rescue it. If I'm being honest, it also saved me." I murmured gently. "Thank you, Thomas." He thought that second chances, third chances, and fourth chances were powerful. Victoria smiled wryly and said, "I ought to be aware." I took another look at Thomas's letter as she walked out of my office. Write for me and make me proud. However, I already knew he was proud. Not only myself, but everyone in this building who had accepted change, learned to strike a balance between profit and compassion, and realized that kindness and success weren't mutually incompatible. I would begin examining other businesses tomorrow in an effort to find ones that need the same change. For the time being, though, I sipped coffee while I watched the city lights come to life from my corner office. I am thankful for the turn of circumstances that led me to Thomas's hospital room, and for the demonstration that sometimes the first step to something better is losing everything. The security guard, who had before turned me away with regret, now greeted me with a pleasant grin when I entered the premises the next morning. "Miss Collins, good morning. Improving the lives of anyone today?" I reflected about Victoria, Thomas, and all the changes we had already done and would make. "Daily," I answered. "That's the main goal of wise investing." And Thomas was grinning someplace I knew. Story 3. Are you still using the internet? Carving into his turkey with a sense of superiority that only a Wall Street banker could summon. My brother David grinned across the Thanksgiving table. "Again, what is it? Selling goods on Amazon." I inhaled deeply, telling myself it was not worth it to engage. I had learned patience from 5 years of these punches. I reached for the mashed potatoes and said, "It's an e-commerce platform, at the very least. We support tiny companies." My mother intervened, her voice brimming with phony pity. "Oh, honey. It's time to find a real job, don't you think? Jessica, your cousin, is hiring." My name is Olivia Walker, and I have been developing what would turn out to be one of the nation's most prosperous e-commerce platforms for the last 5 years. My family wouldn't be aware of it. I was merely their stray daughter, a play on the internet, who had thrown away a bright future in finance. I started to say, "Mom," but my father interrupted me with a hand gesture. "Olivia, enough. You've had this little pastime long enough. You are 30 years of age. Time to mature and enter the real world, the actual world." As if starting a business from scratch and working for 18 hours a day wasn't enough. As though my platform's millions of companies weren't genuine. As if the millions of dollars we were making weren't actual currency. However, none of that was known to them. I would cease disclosing information about my company to them. It became evident years ago that they had no interest in comprehending what I was constructing for them. A corner office and a prominent corporate name were prerequisites for success. David said that he was talking about the actual world. "Have you heard about my most recent agreement? Closed it yesterday. Largest merger in the history of the company." Squeezing his hand across the table, my mother smiled. "That's fantastic, my love. Is this going to result in another promotion?" I moved my food about my plate while I listened to their chatter. This was always the case. David's accomplishments were honored. Mine was rejected. They knew the route he was taking. Prestigious university, Wall Street position. Steady. advance in the company's hierarchy. I had the audacity to try something new, and that made me a failure in their eyes. My mother made another attempt later that night when I was cleaning up in the kitchen. I only worry about you, Olivia, my love. Spending so much time by myself gazing at computer displays. It's unhealthy. I used more power than was necessary to scrape a pan. Mom, I'm not alone. Now I have a squad. Actually, 20 individuals. She hesitated. The dish towel hung in midair. Do you employ people? Yes, I answered, maintaining a calm voice. Last month, we relocated to a genuine office space. I briefly noticed a glimmer of curiosity in her eyes, but it vanished right away. That must cost a lot of money. Are you certain you're not taking on more than you can handle? And there it was, the never-ending uncertainty, the belief that I was incapable of knowing what I was doing. Since they consistently responded with the same worry, skepticism, and barely concealed disapproval, I would stop sharing my accomplishments with them. I quickly put the final dish in the drying rack and said, I'm managing fine. I should leave early for tomorrow's meeting. Getting together? From the doorway with your computer, my father scoffs. I reached for my purse and coat. I resisted the impulse to tell him who I was meeting with, which was one of Silicon Valley's biggest venture capital firms. However, what was the purpose? They had long since decided on my pastime. I was able to relax and release the pressure of their disapproval during the drive home. My CEO and best friend, Maya, sent me a text message that made my phone buzz. The family inquisition, how is it going? I smiled despite myself. Same as always. David's a genius. I'm wasting my life. You know, the usual. If they only knew, she replied. Can't wait to see their faces when the news breaks. Yes, the news. The thing I've been sitting on for weeks now, wanting to tell my family, but knowing they wouldn't understand its significance. The Ford's article was scheduled to come out in less than a month, featuring our company in their annual 30 under 30 list. But it wasn't just that they were doing a full profile on our meteoric rise in the e-commerce space. I pulled into my driveway, my modern townhouse, a stark contrast to the modest suburban home I just left. Another sign of success. I kept quiet about my family. Still far. I lived in my starter apartment, barely making ends meet. Inside, I kicked off my heels and settled onto my couch, opening my laptop to check the day's numbers. Even on Thanksgiving, our platform never slept. The dashboard showed over $500,000 in transactions processed just today. A slow day given the holiday. 5 years ago, this had all been a dream. I was working 60-hour weeks at a prestigious financial firm, doing exactly what my parents wanted, and feeling completely unfulfilled. The idea for my platform came from watching small business owners struggle with online sales. They needed something simpler, more intuitive, more integrated than what was available. I started building at nights and weekends, learning to code through online courses, piecing together the foundation of what would become Walker Commerce. When I quit my job to pursue it full-time, my family thought I was having a mental breakdown. She's throwing away everything she's worked for. I overheard my mother telling her friends, and for what? Some website. Those early days were brutal. Living on savings, working from my little apartment, dealing with unending technological issues and suspicious potential clients. But slowly, steadily, it started to work. Small enterprises signed up. The platform grew. Revenue started filtering in. I recruited Maya first, my old college friend, who'd been silently supporting me on from the outset. She quit her corporate career to join me, believing in my vision when even I had concerns. Together, we polished the platform, increased our offerings, and started establishing a genuine company. My phone buzzed again. An email from our lead developer announcing a new feature rollout. I answered promptly, then spotted another communication from our PR team regarding the planned Forbes feature. They wanted to plan a picture session next week. A picture session for Forbes magazine. Sometimes it still felt strange. The next morning I was in our workplace early as usual, with large windows and exposed brick walls. The room was airy and contemporary. Nothing like the corporate cubicles my family believed were a sign of achievement. I prefer these quiet times to concentrate on strategy, but our crew would arrive later. Maya stated as she entered with 2 cups of coffee. You're here early. She took a seat across from my desk and handed me one. I took an appreciative drink, still recuperating from family pleasure. The typical drama. Dad wanted to know if I was still using the internet. Maya gave an eye roll. Unlike what she's doing, which is managing the same insurance company that his father founded 50 years ago. Hey, I made a feeble protest. Isn't that a legitimate business? Helping thousands of small companies prosper isn't genuine enough. So she laughed. She was right. Just last month, our platform handled more than $100 million in transactions. By providing them with simple access to internet sales, we enabled many small companies to endure and prosper during the epidemic. We were recently valued at slightly over $500 million. However, try explaining it to those who believed that being successful required spending all day in meetings and wearing suits. Maya reminded me that the Forbes article will be published in 3 weeks. Have you made up your mind how you will tell them? I leaned back in my chair and sighed. I considered simply letting them know when it comes out. Is that petty? After they've been ignoring everything you've created for 5 years. It's not petty, no. Karma is to blame. Our development team arrived anxious to demonstrate us the most recent platform improvements, interrupting our talk. Before long, the workplace was a hive of activity. Designers working together to enhance the user interface. Customer service agents assist customers in making their stores more efficient. Members of the marketing team are organizing our upcoming campaign. My true world was this: a successful business founded on a single concept and unwavering willpower. Everyone here shared my vision from the start and had faith in what we were accomplishing. In contrast to my family, they knew we were doing something remarkable even before they saw my name in Forbes. Our newest board member, a seasoned software entrepreneur who had contributed to our most recent investment round, and I spoke via video call later that afternoon. He looked over our monthly report and commented, "The numbers look fantastic. Olivia, you've created something truly amazing. Few founders are able to expand this quickly without sacrificing their core values." I grinned as I recalled my father's contemptuous remarks on my small pastime. "Thank you," I said. "We have only just begun. Indeed, site should be improved by the forts component. Have you considered how this may alter the situation? I've probably given it more consideration than I ought to have. Our presence in the 30 under 30 list would not be the only announcement made in the article. It would include information on our expansion, value, and influence on the e-commerce market. Everything I'd been silent about for years would be made public. I'm ready for the spotlight. We have a good public relations plan in place," I told him. I didn't mention that I was more worried about how my family would respond than about any possible public criticism. How would they react if they found out that their failed daughter had created a $500 million business right in front of them? My mother contacted me that night while I was working late in my workplace. I nearly put it on voicemail, but guilt got the better of me. "Hello, Mother. Olivia, sweetheart. I've been reflecting about our conversation from yesterday. With the cautious tone she adopted when she believed she was being helpful, she started. For you, Jessica's firm would be ideal. They even provide excellent advantages." I squeezed the bridge of my nose while gazing at the several displays on my desk that showed the real-time metrics for our platform. Since she began speaking, more than 10,000 transactions had been completed. "Thank you for the idea, Mom, but I'm not seeking for work. My company is going nicely. Is it stable, though? Are you covered by health insurance? A strategy for retirement? Olivia, these are vital things." I considered her extensive perks package. The equity. We offered $401k matching to all of our workers last year. However, elaborating on any of it would just raise more queries that I wasn't prepared to address. "I'm all right, Mom. Really?" She let out a sigh. The sound I'd become so accustomed to, that heavy, disappointed sound. "Why you won't look at other options is beyond me. Your sibling," I interrupted. "I have to leave. Our West Coast team is on the phone with me." I hung up and took a moment to sit quietly while scanning my office. Her company's values were bolded and displayed on the wall across from my desk. Inventiveness, honesty, effect. Framed articles praising our platform's innovations from various tech publications hung beneath them. My family didn't care about any of them. They didn't count because they weren't published by the Financial Times or the Wall Street Journal. Maya waved a tablet with her head stuck in. "Final clearance for the Forbes photo shoot site. This office is where they wish to do it. Any ideas?" I gave a nod. "It makes sense. Just make sure the team is photographed. Not just me. This show isn't just about one woman. She settled into a chair and spoke of the team. Since we revealed the new equity distribution, morale has skyrocketed. People are thrilled with the expansion. I was especially pleased that our most recent funding round had enabled us to raise everyone's equity stakes. Everyone who contributed to the establishment of this business should be able to enjoy its success. I said, "That's good," then paused. "Maya, regarding my family, am I being immature? Am I supposed to tell them everything?" She gave this some thought. "Do you recall being told it was only a phase when you initially started? That you would return to your actual employment in 6 months?" I gave a nod. "And remember when you landed your first major client, and he said that the inability to establish a long-term online business was simply a matter of luck?" "Yes." "And remember last Thanksgiving when your brother literally patted you on the head and said, maybe you could help him build a website for his dog's Instagram?" I couldn't help but laugh at that memory. "Okay, I get your point. They've had 5 years to take an interest in what you're building, to ask real questions, to understand why you believed in this so much. They chose not to let them find out with everyone else." She was right, of course. My family's dismissal of my work wasn't just about lack of understanding, it was about lack of respect. They decided early on that my path wasn't valid, that success only counted if it followed their predetermined script. Well, they were about to learn just how wrong they'd been. The morning the Forbes article was scheduled to go live, I sat in my office staring at my phone. 3 weeks had passed since Thanksgiving, and my family remained blissfully unaware of what was coming. I declined their weekly dinner invitations, citing work commitments, which wasn't entirely untrue. Preparing for the publicity around the Forbes piece had kept us all busy. "It's live," Maya announced, bursting into my office with her tablet. "And it's wow." I grabbed the pill from her, my heart beating as I read the headline, "The Future of E-Commerce. How Olivia Walker Established a $500 million Company from Her Flat." The piece was all our PR team had hoped for and more. It documented our company's phenomenal growth, our creative approach to aiding small companies, and the influence we made on the e-commerce sector. There were images of our workplace, our personnel, and yes, me, described as the visionary founder reinventing internet shopping. "Your phone's going to explode up," Maya cautioned, just before it started vibrating with alerts. LinkedIn messages, Twitter mentions, email notifications, SMS messages from friends and former coworkers, but nothing yet from my family. They weren't very interested in tech news. About an hour later, that changed. "Olivia." Over the phone, my mother's voice sounded high-pitched. "Why is Jessica phoning me to inquire about your appearance in Forbes?" Since I was in Forbes magazine, I inhaled deeply. "Mom, this morning, the piece was out. However, how? Why? What is this about a business worth $500 million? That would be my small pastime." Unable to control the sharpness in my voice, I spoke. "For the past 5 years, you and Dad have been asking me to stop." On the other end, there was silence. Then, "We are now on our way to your workplace." "I have meetings, Mom. Cancel them," she said. "I need to see this for myself, and so must your father." I checked my schedule and saw that I had back-to-back calls with partners and investors who were curious about the Forbes story. I can't simply call it quits. Remember that I am in charge of a business. "Olivia, please." She lowered her voice. "We must comprehend." I let out a sigh and gestured to Maya across my office's glass wall. She had already nodded. "Recognize my needs. All right. Arrive at 2 o'clock. I'll have the address sent to you by my assistant, Helper." I had already ended the call when my mother squealed. "Head of family drama, Mr. Tucker. Coming. At 2 o'clock, they will arrive here. Are you able to reschedule your afternoon already?" She was done. "Do you want me to alert the group?" I gave a nod. Our staff members were somewhat aware of my family's circumstances. We all worked so closely together that it was difficult to disguise. Simply inform them that we will be hosting guests. In response to the surge of interest sparked by the Forbes piece, the following few hours were a flurry of phone calls and emails. Media queries were being handled by our PR staff. Our servers were seeing record traffic from users looking at the platform, and our sales team was inundated with questions. The elevator doors opened at precisely 2:00 p.m., and my parents entered our office. They looked almost ludicrous as they took in the room. The contemporary furnishings, the busy staff, and the wall of newspaper mentions. Our receptionist, Miss Walker, yelled, "Your parents are present." Everywhere in the office, heads turned. I sensed my crew was observing. They were intrigued by the family they had heard so much about. To welcome them, I left my office. Father, mother, greetings from Walker Commerce. My mom had her handbag in her hand like a lifeline. She glanced around the room. My dad is overly strict. His face was inscrutable. All of this is yours? He inquired. Yes, I stated plainly. Do you want to take a tour? I walked them around the office and explained the purpose of each department, introducing the important team members. Halfway through, Maya joined us and gave us background information on our development and accomplishments. You mentioned having staff. As our development team worked together on a new feature, my mother walked away. We now employ 78 people full-time. I also provided part-time employees and contractors. 78. My dad's voice broke a little. We arrived at my office where I motioned for them to take a seat. My father's gaze was fixed on the Forbes item that was still up on one of my monitors. $500 million. Silently, he said. According to our most recent appraisal round, your firm is valued at $500 million. Indeed. I was surprisingly at ease when I sat behind my desk. 2 months have passed since then. It's most likely higher now because of the Forbes coverage. My mom was slowly shaking her head. However, how? When? You told us. But why? What time would you have paid attention? I inquired. You told me I was wasting my life when I founded the business. You told me it was just luck when I got my first big clients. You were concerned that I was taking on too much when I hired my first staff members. We were worried. My dad defended this. The internet. It's not steady. We wanted a legitimate career for you. Dad, this is a real career. Examine your surroundings. This is the closest thing to reality. At that moment, Maya knocked and came in holding a tablet. I'm sorry to bother you, but you must see this. Tomorrow morning, CNBC wants to conduct a live interview. I take a quick look at the email she was displaying to me. Make a reservation and have PR provide a briefing. With wide eyes, my parents observed this discussion, as if they were having difficulty balancing their perception of their failed daughter with this one of me as the CEO and decision maker. My mother added quietly, You were building this all this time when we thought you were struggling. Yes, mother. You've been pushing job listings at me throughout all those family meals. I already had dozens of employees. You were concerned about my stability all those times. I was raising venture funding, millions of dollars. You often made comparisons between David and me. I was creating something greater than his whole company. At that, my dad winced. Olivia, you didn't think I was real. I was done. You made no effort to comprehend what I was doing. You basically concluded that since I took a different route, I was failing. That's unfair, he said. We wish to keep you safe. No, I answered firmly. You want to dominate me. You wanted me to define success according to your standards. But take a look at me now. This is how I accomplished it. Without your assistance, without your consent, and without your support. My mother was now wiping her eyes with a tissue while sobbing quietly. My father appeared disoriented, his customary self-assurance broken. Slowly, he said, I believe. We must apologize to you. Actually, a few of them, Maya said from the doorway. I gave her a quick glance, but I couldn't help but smile. How come you didn't inform us? My mom inquired about all of this once again. Leaning back in my chair, I thought about the query. Would anything have changed as a result? Would you have realized what I was creating all of a sudden? Would you cease pressuring me to find a legitimate job? They looked at one another, unable to respond. I believed I had stated that. You had already determined that I was failing, so I stopped informing you about my accomplishments. Until something like this happened, nothing I said would have convinced you otherwise. I pointed to the article about forts, made you face the reality. My phone rang with another notice at that very moment. I stood up and said, I have a call with Singapore in 5 minutes. You can be shown by Maya. Singapore? With weakness, my father repeated. I told our new regional partners that we are expanding into Asian markets. My mom was standing with her handbag in her hand. Could we all eat supper together tonight? Olivia, we must discuss all of this. I gave them a look, observed them closely. For years, my father had been warning me that I was squandering my potential. My mom, who had been concerned that I was wasting my life. Somehow, they appeared smaller. Their faith in the world and their role in it was shattered. I said, I can't tonight. We're celebrating the Forbes article as a company. Perhaps this weekend, though. They accepted the minor compromise by nodding. They turned to go. At the door, my father hesitated. Silently, he murmured, "We were mistaken. Almost anything. I sincerely hope you will pardon us." Maya came back to my office after they had left. That was intense, indeed. It sounded wobbly, but I laughed. One magazine article put an end to 5 years of rejection and skepticism. She fixed an inaccurate profile about the $500 million business their failed daughter founded while they were distracted, so it wasn't just any story. I gazed around at my true family that night at the business party. The group who supported and collaborated with me helped make this goal a reality. Together, we accomplished this, demonstrating that success isn't necessarily what people expect it to be. David texted me, and my phone buzzed. I just noticed the Forbes article. "Holy crap, sis! Why didn't you speak up?" Grinning. I took a step back. "Are you referring to my small online pastime?" The weeks that followed were filled with speaking engagements, media appearances, and countless congratulations. My parents sat in the audience, looking somewhere between proud and embarrassed at every interview they could locate. The vibe was very different at the first family meal following the Forbes disclosure. The job recommendations and anxious glances are no longer there. Rather, they posed pertinent inquiries regarding the company. As my mother hustled the salad, she remarked, "I still can't believe it, actually," after listening to my answers. "We believed that I had completed when you believed I was failing. Perhaps this is the lesson to be learned. Success isn't always what you think it will be." David shook his head. He had flown in specifically for the dinner. "I feel like a complete moron. Every time I ridiculed your website, you were a fool." I readily agreed, "But now at least you acknowledge it." My dad cleared his throat. "I've been thinking, Olivia. The organization. Perhaps it's time to consider updating our systems. If you believe that your platform may be useful." I grinned as I recalled all the times he called internet commerce a passing trend. "Next week, my team will get in touch with you. For insurance companies, we offer an excellent solution." None of us failed to see the irony. Now, the daughter they believed was failing was able to assist in modernizing the family business. As I drove home later that evening, I reflected on how success is frequently at its most subdued right before it becomes indisputable. I had been working in relative obscurity for years, creating something that my family didn't comprehend or value. Even when no one else shared my vision, I continued to believe in it. Maya CNBC sent me a message on my phone that said, "I'm ready to shock more people who underestimated you." Thinking of all the other dreamers out there who are dealing with their own uphill struggles and dabbing families made me smile. Even though everyone else referred to it as a hobby, perhaps my story would help them maintain their vision, because the greatest success stories occasionally begin with someone declaring that they will never succeed, and one individual made the decision to disprove them.